Hello, Bible readers. It is Monday, November 2nd. We're reading from Judges chapters 16 through 19 and Luke chapter 22, verses 31 to 62. So we're into this part about Samson, which is interesting. At First Lutheran, we have bags that families can pick up on their way into worship, kind of busy bags kind of thing. And in a lot of them, there are these like action figures. And over the years, I know a lot of families, a lot of kids, I've heard them say, "Oh, that's Jesus." He's like this ripped, almost like like a pro wrestling looking figure. And of course, it's not Jesus. It's not meant to be Jesus. It's meant to be Samson. Samson is this figure of our biblical imaginations, I think, because of the stories that we're reading here. And maybe we didn't all know what a not great judge he is. He's not lifted up as a prime example of faithfulness in Scripture. His relationship to the Philistines, it yo-yos from legalistic vengeance to reckless love. Boy, Samson loves women, right? Even though they repeatedly betray him in different ways. And I've read some commentaries that speak of how Samson is like a good representation of God and God's relationship to Israel. When we get to some of the prophets later on, we're going to hear this metaphor used that Israel acts like a cheating spouse, if you will, and Samson kind of shows how this can work too. I thought I'd read a couple things here about Samson. Samson's request for God to let him die with the Philistines. Philistines, I'm not sure. His request for God to let him die. He's not the first one to offer God a death wish. Moses, Elijah, Jeremiah, Jonah, they all say, just let me die in some different way. And in each of these cases, God always refuses the request to put the person to death and instead sends them on to continue their mission. Samson's request for God to let him die is the only time such a request is granted in the Old Testament. So there you go for dear old Samson. As we enter into chapter 17 and to the end of Judges, this is the part that concludes the book of Judges. And it concludes with religious and social chaos. It ends with Israel's near disintegration as a covenant community with God. In these chapters, the era of judges will end. Idols are worshipped, priests are hired for personal gain, defenseless foreigners are mercilessly attacked, strangers are mistreated, an Israelite woman is brutally raped and murdered by Israelites. The entire Israelite tribe of Benjamin is nearly exterminated by fellow Israelites. Additional Israelite men, women, and children are killed. Other women are kidnapped. Israel seems oblivious to the extent of its disobedience and disloyalty to its covenant with God. Yet, and this is the thing that Judges really amazes me with, God remains to work in and through the perverse actions of Israel in order to preserve its life and prepare for a whole new way of leading and guiding Israel through the institution of the king. God is at work in ways that Israel cannot see at the time. In Luke, we're getting at the Last Supper. This is meant to show the disciples' work is Jesus's work. We see many echoes here. Luke wants to lift up the work of the disciples, encourage the work of the church in Luke's own day. So he doesn't want to paint the disciples as being such idiots as perhaps Mark does at times. It's Luke's priority to encourage and lift up those who are trying to follow Jesus. And so here at the Last Supper, we see where their mission comes from, you could say. The authority to judge the tribes of Israel. That's Jesus's authority, and it becomes the authority of the disciples. To do that work as servants. Again, Jesus approached his work as a servant, so shall the disciples. They will suffer and rejected as Jesus was. And then we see in verses 39 to 53, Jesus is a spiritual athlete. I love this metaphor that, the angel is strengthening Jesus kind of like a boxer going to his corner, urging him on in eager prayer. Jesus enters the struggle against powers of darkness. And the other image that I was really struck by is how everything around him in the garden is chaos. People are lashing out, literally by striking the ear of the enemy, but at the center, Jesus stands at peace, that he is the calm in the middle of this swirling chaos of a storm. God is with us in the midst of any storms we know, all of us, at all times and in all places.